And noswaith pawb. Welcome to the evening sessions as we run into the evening sessions of the third day of the Coracle Europe Fringe here in Carmarthen. This evening, for those of you on Zoom, on YouTube, we found ourselves in Tea Traders. So a great thank you to Paul for providing us with the venue for this evening's event, which is Punk Approaches to Poetry. And what's hip hop got to do with it? So I'm pleased to welcome Rufus Mufasa joining me, Dominic Williams, this evening as we launch into our very well rehearsed and practiced performance and conversations, and trying to explain to you maybe what those lines refer to. I'll give a little bit of a background first, because it is kind of 2018, 2019, and a couple of residencies that I was involved with in Sweden kind of bring this together. I was in a residency with Rufus, but just prior to that, I've been doing a lot of work online with another project with a group of artists that was going to produce a residency to follow that with Rufus, and then things started to come together in very strange ways. The original project was a collaboration between Cultivera in the arts organization, culture organization in Sweden, and the Jönköping Folk Archive. There'd been a punk exhibition in the Toronto Library organized by Magnus Gren, and many exhibits were brought in for this exhibition, and among them were a bunch of letters, a pile of letters brought by Lurken, the famous Lurken, the Onion, the lead guitarist with 16BUH, the punk bands that Magnus was also part of. And these letters were correspondence that Lurken had received from other young people in the 80s who were involved in the punk scene. So we're talking about the kind of second wave of punk, 1982, 1983, not the initial 1976, 77 Sex Pistols, the Ramones obviously having a key place. But it was this idea of DIY, lots of young people who were disenfranchised, very unhappy with the establishment, and sharing a love of one particular type of music and going ahead and doing something about it. They were forming bands, they were organizing tours for each other, and this correspondence was how this youth network, peer network, was connecting all over Europe, all over the world. And so what we found in this archive of letters, in these letters, was kind of a social history of young people in the 80s during that period. It transpired that Lurken had boxes and boxes of these letters. And that's where Colin Kiernan had this idea to create an archive of these letters. So we spoke to the Jönköping Folk Archive, and these letters were archived and digitized by the archive. And I was with a couple of other artists working, crafting some responses to that. And then Rufus and I started talking about what might be happening, and started talking about that DIY scene. And Rufus, coming from a much more contemporary perspective, started talking about hip hop. So, you know, what were some of those thoughts that were coming to us then from your knowledge?
So I suppose a lot of my understanding about my practices, and then kind of, you know, having conversations with you and cross-fertilizing some of those ideas. And then obviously I was born in 83, and I was born into quite radical activism. Actually, hadn't really understood that until, you know, decades later. This was like mining, striking, facture, all this kind of stuff going on. Lots of punks around me, lots of different traveling communities. lots of women activists, you know, very, very much making noise and taking up space and calling things out. And it took me a long time to actually realise the relationship of hip hop in all of this. And I can quite clearly understand now that, you know, the punk approaches and hip hop, they are absolutely related. And I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I can remember, so obviously our boys, the culture vultures. And I know that Matt also, you know, Kai's dad from Tangled Parrot, he would later then have, or would have, you know, going through our journey, would have had a very close conversation and relationship with him in the unpacking of everything that you were doing. But I remember another person from the hip hop community, Joe, was saying because he would have been based in Barry, and then we would have been very familiar with his work and his music, and this random conversation we had actually at London Festival, which is very punk, very hip hop, very all of these things, and saying, oh, do you remember so and so, you know her? Yes, and she used to be, you know, packed a van, and it was like, oh my gosh, our families were actually having these conversations, you know, 20-30 years ago. And for me, it was very clear then, as in, absolutely, you know, our hip hop movers and shakers of this country are the children of punks, absolutely straight up and down. And you know, we've got, this year is 50 years of hip hop. We have at least 30 years of Welsh hip hop, absolutely, definitely. And but all of these things are cousins, brothers, sisters of this punk movement. Yeah,
well, it's I mean, there's a connection there. You were born 83, so you weren't involved in that punk movement necessarily directly. But then neither was I. I was around at that time, right? You know, I was a young father. I was a bus driver, and I was aware of the scene. I knew there were you know, boys who I'd been in school with, you know, and they were always the boys, the quiet, gothy boys over in the corner. And I knew of them. They were out of school now. They were doing things, but it was kind of over there on the side to me. But yeah, we were well aware in the Thatcher years of what was going on.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing that, I mean, I remember that music, and I've listened to a lot more of that music over the last 20 years than I did back then.
Yeah.
And over the last 2 or 3 years, an awful lot more. But I think, like, a description of a punk, if we said at the time, would have been all like really confrontational, you know, angry, anti-establishment. Well, I'd certainly agree with the anti-establishment, and confrontational with things that should have been confronted. Absolutely. You know, I mean, you could see in these kids in the 80s, you can see the birth, the seeds of veganism, of Me Too, Black Lives Matter. You know, these are the people who are leading these now in later life, but you can see those philosophies.
Absolutely, and I think my relationship with you know, there's so many labels that have been put onto me, and there's also so many labels, if you like, that I haven't even claimed, because, like you said, I don't know if a punk's going around going, I'm a punk. It's something that's something else, or a traveller's going around and kind of going, I'm a traveller. Like, does that make sense? But for me, so especially with, like, even just like spoken word poetry, you know, I didn't wake up and go, I'm a rapper. These were all things that the outside looking on me put on me. But you know, if you look at 90s hip hop, for example, which is my first ever real, you know, people go, oh yeah, you were just mad on 90s hip hop music. Actually, no, this was my first real deep inquiry into self-directed learning, and all of these teachers, these black men from the other side of the world, they were you know, pioneers in all of this literature that I was asking accessing this. Some people that might not even be looking at their stuff like it is valid contributions to language and literature. I would argue that it absolutely flipping is. But they were my first feminism kind of stirring things, you know. If I got a Tupac t-shirt on today, not the one my cousin Bob licked me. He's like got it with a big, I don't care about the telephone missing, I do care about the Tupac t-shirt. This is a different one, but you know, this was my first teacher, or my first role model, or my first literature I was accessing that was absolutely bringing feminist issues to the forefront. Talking about women's rights, talking about Brenda's got a baby, talking about absolute social deprivation that was really, really impacting the women and young girls of these communities, talking about you know, horrendous things that needed talking about. So I was really interested when I was coming up the ranks, whatever it was I was working out within hip hop. It was actually the punks that were there in the sidelines. You know, I was the size of a house, heavily pregnant with Molly, performing in squats in London, like these punks communities that kind of took me under their wing, if you like, knew exactly what I was doing when I didn't know what I was doing, and just really, really wanted to be part of my story. Yeah,
I think that's a lovely introduction of a word and applying it to punks for a start. Community, you know, talking about community, because very few people from outside of the movement, people maybe even like myself when I was in my early 20s, from the outside would go, oh God, they're just angry, they're just, you know, they're just out for themselves to cause trouble. But there is certainly a sense of community, and how the process of that community is what interests me, how that community actually worked. I mean, I would say, and we'll come back to this about hip hop as well, actually. I mean, if you ask somebody to define what a punk was, somebody who claimed to be a punk, they would each give you a different definition of what it is. And it's probably the same, and that's what I'd like to come back to in a minute, within the hip hop scene as well, you know. But yeah, so I think we can see a similarity in values. Absolutely. And we can see, coming from that same era and what was going on, not just in Britain, but in other parts of the world at the time. But then it's also about the process. It's about this DIY approach to things, you know, that these kids in the 80s, they were organizing everything themselves. So yes, anti-establishment, in the sense of, we don't need the establishment. It's not giving us anything. We can just crack on and we can do things. You know, they were all setting up their own record labels, you know, against resistance against the industry there. And they were sending letters to each other, and, you know, just pen pals, basically. And then a pen pal would say, right, come to Holland, I've got a gig for you. So you and your couple of mates would go, and just go there. So, and how does that link into not just 50 years of hip hop, but the last 10 years of hip hop? Culture vultures.
So no, absolutely. Oh my gosh, you know, the culture vultures, for example, you know, and I don't think it's about necessarily being like anti-establishment, but the anti-establishment isn't looking. The establishment, isn't looking at certain demographics of people and going to be making it easy for them to be like accessing funding or accessing education or accessing opportunity or access. And, you know, me and my people, we you know, I'm not sitting around waiting for anyone to give me permission to endorse what I'm doing, which sounds potentially quite egotistical and audacious. But I wouldn't be here talking to you now if I'd have been waiting around for someone to give me handouts. And I think it's really interesting. Like, we were in a art exhibition last night, very much talking about access and inclusion and kind of changing the narrative about people like taking up these spaces and putting their elbows out and kind of going like, you know, I'm here. And even in a situation I was in with somebody that's kind of like a middleman trying to sort of stamp his foot on me about stuff, just kind of I'm not looking at myself in the mirror and seeing all of these intersectional things about myself that someone is looking at me and seeing. And a few weeks ago I had the comment of you're just a pink fluffy artist and I'm in charge of the money. And then because of my social standing, because of all these things he was rejecting on me that I was, but I am and I'm not, I couldn't even respond to that, because I was like, if I start answering back now and challenging this, it's going to be very easy to go, see, there she goes, she's just being a chav. And it's like, it's kind of about understand, like, you know, you walk around every day, it's like, who's allowed access to the books? If we go back, books were in chains, you know, books were only for certain people. And it's to kind of be really like making an assumption that somebody isn't educated, or somebody, like someone said, I think it might have been Dan that was saying, because if I say like, oh, I've got a master's, which I don't go like, oh, I've got a master's, it kind of like quite sharp, but actually, and then you just go, no, that's like you're one of the 2% of the, how did you explain it?
2% or 3% of the population.
2%, 3% of the population. So I was like, oh my gosh, really? Like, I hadn't even thought about that. So I suppose what I'm trying to say, maybe a bit badly, is like the arts, for example, yeah. So like where I'm coming from, not so much my dad, but like, you know, I knew very clearly, like my sister was 4 years old, I want to join the Navy, like we all joke in our family that she must have been a sailor in a previous life. Yeah. She knew very much, you know, that she loved Tina Turner and she wanted to join the Navy, and that was that. And I always used to say like, oh gosh, no, I'm like grown up and I don't know what I'm going to do, which is actually a lie. Because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an actress. Like, I didn't even say actor, I want to be an actor. Like, it was very sort of like, you know, gender balanced about it all the time. I want to be an actor. And it was like, oh, no, you can't be an actor. Like, like, I can't imagine saying that to my children now. Like, I want to be whatever. I'd be like, flipping, let's go, let's do it. I would never say, like, you can't do that. And I'm not kind of like throwing shade at my family. That was a class thing, you know. It's like, well, if you're gonna do that, then you need a plan B, and every option I was coming up with, you know, just wasn't cutting it. But it's kind of about that thing. And then I suppose if you've got, you know, people coming from more privileged families or backgrounds or setups, you know, they're never going to be told, oh, you can't go to art college, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. And then that really affects the balance of who's making the art for the country, who's making the art for the people, who's actually being represented, who's actually being seen. So for me, you know, I'm not an actor, but like I've kind of gone about it in different ways. But now a lot of what I do every single day is about trying to challenge like the power, the ninja privilege power of things that people are playing, because, you know, I've got children, I've got friends with children. I don't want this to be as hard for, and I had to go to Hey Literature Fan. Hey have been fantastic to me, really have. So this isn't a thing about Hey, but this year I didn't want to go, and I was like, why don't I want to go? And I thought of every reason about not going. And what was really the problem was, it wasn't about going to Hey, it was about that I was grieving the person that I used to be, that could walk into those spaces straight up and down. Like, my biggest problem is I can't code switch. I'm exactly who I am and what I am in any space, whether that's in Hay or in London Festival, or do you understand what I'm trying to say? Yeah. And then what I was grieving the old version of me that walked fluidly into these spaces, like, yeah, what's happening? And then all these different things that, as I've progressed personally and professionally, that have hacked away, and made me question about which spaces and how much space I'm taking up. And I suppose I've come back to now this very, you know, it's like even the last couple of months, I've never been made to feel more punk or made to feel dirty for having these kind of punk ethoses. But that's not me. I'm not doing anything wrong. Actually, what's going on is, I think people are getting scared, or establishments are getting scared, because there is an absolute power shift happening, and I'm not waiting for permission. I will just do it. I will just support people. And with the hip hop stuff, we've kind of got the ethos and obligation like each one teach one, or you know, if you've been mentored, you have then a dyletswydd, which is a responsibility or an obligation to pay that back, to pass that down to for people to rise with you. It's not something you keep, and it's not accessible to other people. And yeah, so.
But it may sound cliche to say that music is the vehicle for this. You know,
Yeah.
and I know that sounds like a cliche, but it becomes the way forward. You know, we were talking to Gemma about her PhD,
Yeah.
and I can't remember the term. Somebody may be able to give me the term. But there are solid infrastructures in today's society that are deliberately put in place to prevent certain members of society accessing.
Glass ceiling.
No, it's sort of something injustices.
Systemic
Systemic.
injustice. Systemic injustice.
Yeah.
So, and to deal with that systemic injustice, you end up with underground movements. And then these particular underground movements move towards music, towards punk, towards hip hop, and then there is. You've spoken about some sort of hierarchy within that industry as well. You know, because you've had battles within hip hop as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not just battle rap.
No, definitely battles. You know, with all of it, and I just have been quite naive actually when. I suppose when you're giving and you're doing all this stuff, and then you grow, and then you kind of reach out to people that you've supported or done for gigs or whatever. And, I need some help to push this album, and it's like, you know, so we kind of like, I don't think it's an exclusively Welsh thing. I don't think it's an exclusively Welsh hip hop thing or a Welsh music scene thing or whatever. But it's, you know, like a battle crab mentality, and it's just totally whack, and it is real and it exists, and it's like people go, and I think especially with regards to like Welsh funding, for example, you know, it doesn't help that you know, some people are going to get it, other people are not going to get it, but also it is no detriment to me in my development if you are being successful. It's actually freaking better. So we should be constantly trying to rise each other up. And I just don't think we're, you know, across the board, I don't think it's quite there. And you know, there is I think I was quite naive about being a female in it, but also, you know, with that naivety in mind, because I was a woman, I couldn't be a crap woman or a mediocre rapper. I had to work so much harder than. So for this is kind of so this at this space and time now, I'm actually published in Poetry Wales and Planet Magazine at the same time, and I should be shouting from the rooftops about that. And in Planet Magazine, I'm actually talking about hip hop culture. We should all be shouting about that. That is massive. That hip hop is actually Beyond the Border Story Festival this year. I did a lecture performance there on hip hop. This is a win. This is proper shit. But I am actually so exhausted to get to here in space and time. I'm like, it's okay. I'm like, I'm done. Like, I'm not done. You know what I mean? But and I just don't want it to be that exhausting for anyone else. So I find it quite difficult that there's so many barriers or so much cattiness or so much mean stuff would even be a thing that was part of my journey. Like how, and then you go, how much of a threat is actually little old me to the whatever it is that these things would be put in place. It actually quite blows my mind.
But you are, aren't you? And that's where the threats come from, and that's where the fear is of those who control, you know. It's part of your creative process as well, Mike. I mean, when that dropped, you know, you have that moment where like done.
And I feel so. I've actually got a album very flowing myself to the finish line of that, which drops this year. It's very important to me. I kind of want that gone to do exactly the same thing. People go, oh, the album's done, we've got a tour schedule. Like, oh gosh, I feel like I hit jackpot really with the pandemic, because I could just drop it, and because the world had changed, so like I could kind of go, I've given you enough of my body and my soul in everything performances, and now actually I've got into a territory that they didn't even want me to be in. And as strong as I am, and whatever, I actually didn't even want to play anymore. And what's really interesting about this hybrid way of working, this DIY of working, and my connection to community way of working, that the exhibition I was at last night was from a coffee shop in the Abertire Valley, and then it was like, I can't even get some people that really should be celebrating this stuff to understand. And it's not because there's anything wrong with me, it's because either they're trying to push back against what I'm doing, or actually it's going over their heads. And then for a Tweety birdie to kind of go to an academic or a professor there, for them to go, I need her number. This stuff like ties in with PhD stuff we're doing.
Yeah.
We want that work exhibited here. No, that's a win for those women that in that valley that don't see themselves as artists. No one's given them permission to see themselves as artists. And I've turned up and gone, you a freaking artist. I'm taking your taking your
and don't wait for
photos.
permission. Don't wait.
I don't know waiting for permission. Like, who's permission? Who's policing this? It's like the same with the Welsh language. Who the frick is policing this? Who's in charge of this? Like, we're allowed to question these things. We're allowed to change these things. And talking about the DIY and the sort of like, fingers up to the wheel, that's kind of makes you feel like it's in charge. But like grime music, early grime artists went to the music industry, went to the labels and said, look, we've got this. If they were not interested, they didn't understand, whatever, well, they could have been like game over. But actually these artists, these communities went, entrepreneurship next level. Grime is one of our biggest freaking exports. Do you know what I mean? It's one of that art form has actually kept me so strong throughout the pandemic. I'm not a grime artist. I like dabble a little bit, trying to stay out my own home, but like, that especially for my Welsh language writing, that art form has enriched me next level. That I feel like our nation should. If anybody wants to celebrate me and what I'm doing and the work I'm creating, they need to recognise that if it wasn't for that art form, that wouldn't be had, especially with the Welsh language stuff, Yeah.
Well, I want to move to I want to get to a place where we close with kind of art form actually, and a clash or a complementary joining of art forms. But so I'm going to move away slightly from the values and that discussion briefly, because this is the essay that I wrote coming out of the residency with my fellow artists from Croatia, Serbia, and Sweden when we were responding to the archive. And there is lots in here about that social history and how that kind of things that Rufus has been talking about. The young people back in the 80s were going through the same battles, but this is also somewhat about my processes and how I and the things that I was doing while I was going through the residency. So I'm going to read you a little piece from here, and then I'm going to move back to look for something a bit more performative from Rufus.
Okay.
So one of the things that happened during this residency was the other three artists were all contemporary artists, all used to doing artist presentations, and they had all their PowerPoints and their visuals, and we were being asked to make some sort of exhibition. And I thought, well, I'm a poet. I just don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. How do I make an exhibit of poetry? So I had this idea of do you remember those old Dymo things? Do you know the clickers where you put the tape through and you bang,
Yeah.
bang, right? So I decided that I was going to take a poem, and it was a poem that it had been bought from I'd given books to my fellow artists and I'd written dedications in them. So I took the dedications and I cut them up and I made a cut up poem out of these dedications. And what I decided I was going to do is I was going to take as presents, as gifts or as exhibits, I was going to take black vinyls. I was going to scrub the label off and then I would type out the words of the poem on this tape and I would stick them on the album. So you'd have these albums that you could hang on the wall and they'd have the poems written on them. So this idea to do it, and I was on my way out to Sweden. So I was like running around, and so I managed to get hold of some albums from secondhand shop, stuck them in the bath overnight so I could scrape the labels off. The next morning I was flying to Sweden. So I got up in the morning, yes, it scraped off easy enough, put them in my bag, got my tape, got my dymo, chucked it in the bag, got on the train. I was right on the train because, you know, I had a table there, I could get on with a bit of work, Wi-Fi, and get on my laptop and did some poetry. It was a commission I had to do. And then I got to the airport, got on the plane, and there's no Wi-Fi in the place, nothing to do. So on the plane, I decided, right, I can crack on with these things now. So I got my tape out, got my dyno out, and I had like a little envelope in my between my knees. So I started to type out letter by letter, click, 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 click. I typed out the entire 9 lines of the poem 4 times, once for each of my colleagues. So I click, 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 and snap, right, dropped in the envelope, click, 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 click. And it was pretty good timing because like we were only about somebody locked out. We were only about a couple of 10 minutes or so from landing, and I was just finishing. And as I was, this lady came up. Yeah, I know. It's sad. That was a repetition of the Welsh results for those who hear it on YouTube. This lady came wandering up the aisle and she said, I've only just worked. That terrible noise. She said, I've just recovered from an operation and I couldn't work out where it was coming from. I was like, I'm terribly sorry. And I was like, but if you'd said earlier, I would have stopped. You know, so I would have done a lot. So anyway, we got off the plane. You get on the bus to get on the plane, and who's like right next to me on the bus? But this woman. So I said,
about that.
Sorry about that. But what were you doing? You know, so I said, it was like, you know, oh yeah. So what were you doing? I said, I'm a writer. I'm a writer. Said, I'm a poet. Yeah. Well, what are you writing about? I said, well, I'm writing. It's kind of a punk project. I went to art college with the Sex Pistols. I went to art college with Johnny Lang. We used to go to parties. So she was all like, whoa. She was well into it then. And then we were like chatting away in the queue to show our passports. And I think I gave her my email address. We were going to stay into it. And I like typed it out on a bit of tape. Without anything else. So gave her the email address. I thought, I can't wait to get back in touch with her. Never was ever done. That was the end of that. So yeah. So sorry. We're bringing down the deep conversation to a little humorous story, but I want to bring it back to Rufus now and to Dan actually, because we've spoken about philosophy, we've spoken about values, we've spoken about history, but I would like to hear some punk and hip hop really physically coming together now.
Okay.
Do you want to get background around this?
Go on, you explain the background, yeah. And this is so punk.
You go over here, and Dan can take your seat. You're going to come in, Dan. Come into shot.
This is so actually though proper example of like DIY and just like, you know, going for it. And then
I've come to do punk on my classical guitar, but I'm not going to be playing classical guitar. So we had a bit of a conversation about we can link punk and poetry together, and I went off googling and I was like, we're going to do Blitzkrieg Bop. That was something I was really passionate about, linked like Blink 182 when I was young, and punk, Green Day, that kind of era. I was in love with it. And then I said, right, I'm going to play these chords over and over again while you're showering and doing your hair and doing or whatever you were doing, and workshops and all that kind of stuff. So, but we haven't actually played it together, and I don't even know what sounds are going to come out of ourselves. So, you ready?
They didn't give like the government to buy the food, but the thing what I see and you find out Hello, Baba, guys, we go back up in the Bible. Oh, I'll tell you about the Bible. I'll tell you about the Bible. Somebody back on the no matter how feeling I get I got to go down to be bad about it. I want to be bad at it. I want to be fix it and it is that I don't want to. I do you up out the door. I'm not this go. I don't want to. I don't see the door. I'm at the door. I don't want to. I don't see you. I'm at the door. I'm not this go. You get there. I'm so good. I so notice I got this so watch that and the mighty falling for knowledge. God seven God and I need to get people back with you. In my second get you only conversation that you got to level and so back even I'm five and I'm good and my happy ever after because ever you know what I don't want to talk. I don't feel I'm at the door. Oh. Is that it?
I reckon Dan and Rufus. That certainly wasn't disco. But it's a great transition to the next events of this evening, because we're moving from Tea Traders up to Kuru, where there will be three, I was going to say bands, three performance acts. The first, Unbearable Error, is a project, punk poetry project that came out of this project, actually, came out of this residency. And then we have Axelson and Boberg, Spread Concern. Finally, we have Two Men in a Ladies Bobsleigh.
Nice.
So if you're not intrigued yet, I'm sure you should be. It's going to be experimental, it's going to be punk, it's going to be industrial, it's going to be noisy, and even though Wales have won, it's going to be fun.
It was.
So no, Wales lost. Like that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it was just the rhyming with fun. I was trying to rap, and there we go. Okay, John Vals.
It's something like totally punk and hip hop, like, and this is like how I've got this far. It's like proper people being like community. Like I've gone this far because of people on the ground. I can't even find. I think these actually might be my last two books. I kid you not. There's a couple of CDs there as well from my first album. It is a really long story. You can't even find that online. The National Library have a copy. So there's a guy in London selling them for £25 a pop. I don't know how he's got a box of them. So if anybody would like to buy a CD or a book, they're £10, and then it just goes back into keeping us doing this stuff, supporting communities and hitting them where it hurts, right?
Yeah.